"You're the only man I know who could make stability feel boring," my girlfriend said before walking away to chase something more exciting. I didn't stop her once. Months later, she discovered why peace is usually valued only after it disappears. "You're the only man I know who could make stability feel boring." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather outside. I didn't answer. Instead, I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. Slowly, I looked at the mug, the one she bought me 2 Christmases ago. It had a small chip on the handle I'd never bothered to replace. That's when I realized she hadn't just insulted me. She'd been rehearsing that line, probably for weeks. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply nodded once and walked to the bedroom to pack a bag. I thought I was just giving her space. Months later, I'd realize I had quietly walked out of one life and into something neither of us could have predicted. I lost the version of myself that needed her approval that night. I believed I was the problem. I trusted that her restlessness was something I could fix. What I didn't know was that this wasn't a rough patch. It wasn't even a beginning. It was already the end. And she had known it longer than she'd admitted. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 34. We'd been together 3 years. She worked in brand marketing at a mid-sized agency in Manhattan. I ran a small but stable urban planning consultancy. We lived together in a 1-bedroom in the West Village. That's all you need to know right now. Her name was Natalie, and Natalie was the kind of woman who made every room feel like an audition. Not in an unpleasant way. She was magnetic. She laughed easily. She dressed like she always knew someone important might be watching. I loved that about her in the beginning. Later, I would understand that the performance never stopped. Not even at home. Not even with me. But in the beginning, I didn't see any of that. I just saw her. We met at a rooftop event in Tribeca. A mutual friend named Gavin had dragged me there on a Thursday night when I would have preferred takeout and a documentary. I almost didn't go. That part still gets me sometimes. She was standing near the bar arguing cheerfully with someone about whether New York had peaked. I walked over because I had an opinion. 3 hours later, we were still talking. 3 weeks later, she had a drawer at my place. 3 months after that, she moved in. It all felt very natural. The way certain things do when you're not paying close enough attention. The first year was good. Genuinely good. We cooked together on Sundays. We walked the High Line on Saturday mornings before it got crowded. She'd steal my sweatshirts, and I'd pretend to be annoyed. But somewhere around month 14, something shifted. I couldn't name it then. I just felt it. Like a draft from a window you can't find. Something was open that shouldn't have been. At the time, I told myself every relationship goes through adjustment. I should have paid closer attention to what she was adjusting toward. She started going out more. Not excessively. Not in a way I could point to and say, "There. That's the problem." But the frequency changed. Thursday nights became a standing thing with her work friends. Then Fridays got added. Then Sunday brunches that lasted until early evening. I didn't complain. I'm not built that way. I worked late on the nights she went out. I got ahead on projects. I called my brother Dominic sometimes, and we'd talk about nothing important for an hour. I thought I was being supportive. Looking back, I was being invisible, and she was learning to live without me in the room. "You never want to do anything spontaneous," she said one evening. We were eating dinner at home. I made pasta. She was picking at it. "I booked us a weekend in Montreal last spring," I said. That was planned 6 weeks in advance. Most good things require planning. She looked up at me then. Not angry. Something quieter than that. Something almost like pity. "That's exactly what I mean," she said, and went back to picking at her pasta. I didn't respond. I refilled my water glass. That wasn't the real problem. I just didn't know it yet. Her agency landed a major campaign around that time. A lifestyle brand. Very social. Very visible. Suddenly her world expanded in the way that certain careers do when the right project arrives. New clients. New events. New people. I was happy for her. I told her that. Repeatedly. "You deserve this," I said. She smiled. But the smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. I noticed. I dismissed it. I told myself she was just tired. That wasn't even the worst part. His name came up maybe a month later. Julian. He worked at a creative studio that had partnered with her agency on the campaign. She mentioned him first in passing, then more regularly. "Julian thinks the concept needs more edge." Julian got us into that gallery opening. Julian has this whole theory about how brands lose authenticity when they. Sounds interesting, I'd say, and mean it. Because I wasn't the jealous type. Because I trusted her. Because I thought trust was the same as security. I was wrong about that last part. Trust without attention isn't security. It's just absence wearing a noble name. I met Julian at a campaign party she invited me to. He was tall, confident in that specific way that creative people in New York can be when they've had a few recent wins. He shook my hand warmly. Too warmly. Natalie talks about you, he said. Good things, I hope. He smiled. She says you're very grounded. The pause before grounded was small. Almost nothing. But I caught it. And filed it somewhere I didn't examine for another 6 weeks. Something felt wrong that night. I couldn't explain why. I drove home alone because she stayed to help wrap the event. I told myself that was normal. The conversation that ended everything happened on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic night. No rain. No argument leading up to it. Just a Tuesday in October. She came home later than usual. I was on the couch reading. She dropped her bag by the door and stood in the middle of the living room. Like she'd been rehearsing her blocking. I need to tell you something, she said. I put my book down. I haven't been happy for a while. How long is a while? She thought about it. Maybe a year. A year. I absorbed that. Why didn't you say something? I didn't know how to explain it. Try now. She sat down on the chair across from me. Not next to me. Across. You're a good person, she started. Which is never how good news begins. She talked for a long time. About feeling like the relationship had no momentum. About wanting something that felt alive. About needing to be with someone who made her feel like she was moving forward. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was very quiet. You're the only man I know who could make stability feel boring, she said. Final punctuation on everything she'd just said. I looked at the chipped coffee mug on the counter and nodded. Okay, I said. Okay. What would you like me to say, Natalie? She didn't have an answer for that. I packed a bag that night. Not dramatically. I folded things neatly. Took my laptop. Took the chargers. Took the book I'd been reading. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom watching me. You're leaving? You told me you haven't been happy for a year. I'm not going to argue you into staying. I didn't say I wanted you to leave. I looked at her then. Really looked. What do you want, Natalie? Silence. That was her answer. I zipped the bag, kissed her on the forehead, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I just left. I thought I was being mature. What I was actually doing was something I wouldn't understand for another 4 months. I stayed with Dominic for 2 weeks. His apartment in Brooklyn was small. He had a couch that was too short for me and a coffee maker that took 11 minutes to brew a full pot. I didn't complain about either. He didn't ask many questions. That's what I needed from him. Just presence. One night he handed me a beer and said, "You doing all right?" "I think so." "You sure?" "Not entirely." He nodded. "Good. That means you're being honest." That conversation helped more than I expected. I still didn't know what I was building toward, but I was starting to feel the edges of something. I got my own place 3 weeks later. A 1-bedroom in Williamsburg. Smaller than the West Village apartment. But mine. Entirely mine. I bought new furniture. Not to erase anything. Just because I wanted things that had no history attached to them. I bought a new coffee mug first. No chips. Clean handle. It sounds small. It wasn't. Work became the thing that organized my days. My consultancy had a mid-sized project I'd been managing somewhat passively. A mixed-use development in Long Island City. I threw myself into it. Not as a distraction. As a decision. I started waking up at 5:30. Reviewing site analysis before the city woke up. I hired a junior associate named Maxwell who was sharp and asked good questions. I started saying yes to meetings I'd previously delegated. I was present in a way I hadn't been in years. And something surprising happened. The project started performing better than projected. Way better. The developers noticed. Then their partners noticed. Then someone passed my name to a firm that was working on a much larger development in Hudson Yards. I took the call. I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. That's when I remembered something. About a year before Natalie and I ended. We'd been at dinner with friends. Someone asked what I wanted professionally. I gave a measured answer. Realistic. Grounded. Natalie had laughed lightly and said, "He's allergic to ambition." But in a charming way. Everyone else laughed too. I smiled. But I remember thinking, that wasn't a joke. That was a verdict. She had already decided what I was capable of. And she'd made peace with the ceiling she'd assigned me. The problem was, I had started to believe her. The Hudson Yards call led to a formal meeting. The firm was called Aldercroft Partners. They were looking for a consultancy to manage the planning coordination on a project that would take 3 years and involve 4 city agencies. It was the largest single project in my professional life. I went into that meeting with the Long Island City numbers, with Maxwell's analysis, with a presentation I'd rebuilt 3 times until it felt like mine. They offered me the contract that same week. I called Dominic afterward. "You got it." "I got it." He made a noise I won't try to describe. Then, "Tell me you're smiling right now." I was standing in the middle of my empty Williamsburg apartment. "Yeah," I said. "I am." I didn't tell Natalie. She'd sent 2 texts in the weeks after I left. One asking if I was okay. One asking if we could talk. I'd responded to the first one. Told her I was fine. I didn't respond to the second. Not out of cruelty. I just didn't have anything to say that would have been useful to either of us. That wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part was not feeling as broken as I expected. I kept waiting for the devastation to fully arrive. It never quite did. 6 months in, my life looked almost unrecognizable. The Aldercroft project was in full motion. I'd expanded the consultancy to 4 people. Maxwell was leading the junior team. I'd also been asked to speak at a regional planning conference in the spring. Not a massive event, but meaningful. The kind of recognition that compounds quietly. I was working harder than I ever had, but it didn't feel like strain. It felt like direction. Something I'd been missing for longer than I'd realized. Looking back, Natalie hadn't just been wrong about me. She'd been wrong about what I was building toward. She'd mistaken patience for passivity, steadiness for stagnation. And by the time she figured out the difference, the story had already moved on without her. I heard about Julian through Gavin. Apparently Natalie and Julian had started seeing each other officially. About 6 weeks after I'd moved out. Gavin mentioned it carefully, like he was delivering news he wasn't sure I wanted. "You okay with that?" he asked. "Sure," I said. Genuinely. He studied me for a second. "You seem different. Good different or bad different? Like someone removed a weight you were carrying and you didn't notice how heavy it was until it was gone." I thought about that for a while afterward. He wasn't wrong. The conference was in April. A planning and urban development summit held at a hotel in Midtown. Around 300 attendees. City officials, developers, architects, other consultants. I was on a panel in the afternoon. The topic was sustainable mixed-use development in post-pandemic urban corridors. I'd prepared carefully, not because I was nervous, because I respected the room. The panel went well, better than well. There was a Q&A afterward that ran 15 minutes over time because the questions kept coming. Afterward, a developer I'd been trying to get a meeting with for 2 years came up and introduced himself. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of it, he'd asked for my card and said, "I've been looking for someone who thinks the way you do." I smiled, said thank you, and meant it fully. I had no idea who else was in that hotel. I was getting water at the side table near the conference room exit when I saw her, Natalie. She was across the room, standing next to Julian. He was holding a lanyard, attendee badge, not speaker, not panelist, attendee. She saw me at almost the same moment. The expression that crossed her face was something I won't forget. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something more complicated. Like watching a map you were certain of suddenly show new terrain. I nodded once. She nodded back. Julian didn't know who I was yet. He was looking toward the front of the room where 2 panelists were still talking. I got my water and walked back to the group I'd been speaking with. What happened next? I found out later from Gavin. Apparently Julian had recognized my name from the panel introduction. He'd told Natalie he wanted to meet me. Said the project I described during the panel was exactly the kind of work his studio was trying to get adjacent to. He'd asked her if she could introduce them. She hadn't told him we'd dated, just that she knew me. He'd said, "Can you introduce me?" She'd said she'd try. She never came over. They left before the closing session. Gavin told me she'd been quiet on the drive back. He'd been in the same car. Some group arrangement. She didn't say much, he said. Just looked out the window most of the way. How was Julian? Talking a lot. About your panel. About the Hudson Yards project. Gavin paused. I think he didn't know the full picture. No, I said. Probably not. She called 2 weeks after the conference. I let it ring. She called again the next day. I let it ring again. Then a text. I just wanted to say congratulations. I saw the write-up about the Aldercroft project. It's impressive. I read it. Didn't respond. Another text came 3 days later. I think I owe you a conversation. I thought about that for a long time. What would that conversation give either of us? She needed to explain herself. I understood, but I didn't need the explanation anymore. That's the part that surprised me most. Somewhere between October and April, I had stopped needing her to understand what she'd gotten wrong. I already knew, and I had moved accordingly. Maxwell asked me once, during a late working session, whether I ever thought about getting into a relationship again. We'd been going over site documentation for 3 hours. It was a strange moment for the question, but sometimes those are the best moments for honesty. Yeah, I said. When it's the right person. How do you know? I thought about it. When being with them makes you feel like you're moving in the same direction. Not toward the same destination necessarily, but the same direction. He nodded slowly. That's a good answer. I had a bad example to learn from. He didn't push further, but he smiled, and I realized I had said it without bitterness. Just fact. That was new. Her third text came on a Saturday morning. I was having coffee at my kitchen table. Morning light coming through the window. The city quiet in the way it sometimes is before 10. I made a mistake. Not just one. Several. I think I needed to say that even if you don't respond. I read it twice. Set my phone face down. Drank my coffee. Watched a pigeon walk across the fire escape railing outside with complete confidence. I thought about what she'd said. About stability being boring. About momentum and aliveness and moving forward. I looked around my apartment. The 4 people I now employed. The Hudson Yards contract. The conference panel. The developer who wanted to work with me. The way I woke up at 5:30 not because I was anxious, but because I was interested. She wasn't wrong that I had been static. But she'd been wrong about what it meant. I wasn't boring because I lacked ambition. I was patient because I was building. There's a difference. She just couldn't see it yet. By the time she could, I was already somewhere she couldn't follow. I didn't respond to her text. Not that day. Not any day after. There was nothing cruel in it. I just had nothing left to give that conversation. Something's close cleanly. Not with a dramatic ending. Not with a final argument or a tearful goodbye. Just with silence. The kind that arrives after you've already done the harder work of moving. Gavin told me later that she and Julian had ended things. 3 months after the conference. He didn't give me details. I didn't ask for them. It wasn't satisfying to hear. It wasn't anything really. Just information. The way most endings eventually become. The Aldercroft project wrapped its first phase in the fall. There was a small internal gathering. Nothing flashy. Just the team. Maxwell had brought a bottle of something decent. We stood in the conference room of the firm's midtown office. Big windows. The city laid out below. Someone gave a short toast. I looked out at the skyline. Thought about the Tuesday in October when I'd packed a bag. When I'd kissed her forehead and walked out of a door I thought I might regret leaving. I didn't regret it. I hadn't for a long time. But I was grateful for it. In the strange way you can be grateful for something that hurt. Because sometimes the thing that removes you from the wrong place is the same thing that puts you in the right one. I just hadn't known that yet when I walked out the door. She called one last time. A Sunday. November. I saw her name on the screen. I held the phone for a moment. Then set it back down. Let it ring through to voicemail. She didn't leave one. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cold. I just had nothing left that needed to be said. And I think she finally understood that. Because she never called again after that. Some people look for excitement because they don't trust stillness. They read quiet as empty. They read patience as defeat. They mistake someone building something for someone going nowhere. And by the time they understand the difference, the builder has already finished what they started and moved on to something even larger. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Quietly. The way everything real usually does. And by the time she understood why she had walked away from it, I was already somewhere new. Already building. Already still. Already exactly where I had always been going. She just hadn't waited long enough to see it.